I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Abraham Lincoln, 1854. Sectional discord has plagued the American Republic since the debates over the Constitution. Slavery, rivalry economic systems, and class structure would all be vignettes in the arguments over states' rights and secession. The notion of secession would first take form in the nullification between John C. Calhoun and Andrew Jackson over the Tariff of Abominations of 1837. The thought of secession was not a radical idea at the time, being that each state thought of itself as a separate country rather than a united states. Sectional strife would be further exacerbated during the Market Revolution and American expansion west. The Market Revolution would bring new technologies to the forefront and bring America into a new industrial age, rivaling with the Cotton Kingdom of the South. In addition, the time period would see notions of reform and universal white male suffrage throughout the North and West, while the South stayed idle to their rigid social hierarchy. Manifest Destiny would pin North against South in the rousing debates over the expansion of slavery into the new territories. By the 1850s, the Senate, the laboratory for debate, would be in the spotlight of the growing sectional discord that would eventually erupt into civil war by 1861. Debate over slavery into new territories did not have its genesis in the aftermath of the Mexican-American War. In fact, it started 25 years earlier with the settlers occupying the Louisiana Territory. It was at this moment that Congress was going to have to discuss policy on the expansion of slavery into the West. By 1820, the territory of Missouri was ready to apply to statehood, and its application as a slave state put the issue of the institution expansion on the national level. With the laboratory of debate being in the Senate, no region, North or South, wanted to lose political power. Henry Clay of Kentucky devised a compromise that would admit Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, keeping the balance in the Senate. In addition, slavery would be banned north of the 3630 line, excluding Missouri, in the Louisiana Territory only. The compromise would be the basis for the Southern argument against any attempt and/or discussion by the government on the question of slavery in the West. This compromise would keep the sectional peace for 30 years until the Band-Aid would eventually be torn off in 1850. The cession of that kind of property, for so it is misnamed, is a bagatelle which would not cost me in a second thought if, in that way, a general emancipation and expatriation could be effected, and gradually and expatriation with due sacrifices. I think it might be, but as it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Thomas Jefferson, April 1820. With the Missouri Compromise subduing sectional tensions for a while, the aftermath of the Mexican-American War and the United States acquiring the Mexican Cession would thrust the issue of slavery to the forefront. Congressman David Wilmot, who was a Democrat, a Free Soiler, and a Republican, would propose a bill to outlaw slavery in the new territories that were acquired during the Mexican-American War. While the bill would never take shape, the Wilmot Proviso did spark fiery debate in Congress as well as the first talks of secession. While the Proviso, or extension, passed in the House of Representatives, remember, they had the northern majority due to seats being allocated by population, it was struck down in the Senate, where the southern contingent had a balance between free and slave states. As the Wilmot Proviso erupted debate in Congress over the expansion of slavery into the territories of the Mexican Cession, the issue over California would soon ignite a powder keg that would define the 1850s. California became the crown jewel of the Mexican Cession due to a vein of gold found in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As a result, the California gold rush ensued and the population exploded. By 1850, the territory qualified for statehood and wanted to enter the Union as a free state. But this would offset the balance in the Senate. Remember, if a bill was passed, such as in the House of Representatives, with a Northern majority due to population, like what we had in the Wilmot Proviso, it would be defeated in the Senate, which had a 50-50 split between free and slave states. It was this delicate balance that Southerners needed to make sure no anti-slave laws could be passed. If California entered as a free state, it offsets the balance into the Northern or Free Soiler favor. It is for these political reasons that the South felt short-sighted and the clamoring for secession begins in earnest. So to ease the tensions, Henry Clay is called upon to orchestrate a compromise to keep the Union together, for now. Clay comes in as the compromiser and creates a bill that as California enter as a free state, New Mexico is divided into the New Mexican and Utah territories, which was opened up to popular sovereignty, or the people having the power to decide if the territory should be free or slave, and a very strict fugitive slave law. While the compromise did issue a calm during the time, the fugitive slave law would ignite further tensions between the regions, especially with the growing sentiments of abolitionism in the North. Settlers began to pour into the unorganized territory of the Louisiana Purchase in the 1840s and 50s. With political and economic interests of the time, think back to the Market Revolution, the call for a transcontinental railroad was paramount. To have the railroad go through the region, the federal government needed to organize the territory and legalize land claims. This once again opened up the door for debate on the expansion of slavery in the West, as seen in the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. With the younger generation taking control of Congress, Clay, Calhoun, and Webster have all passed on by now, Stephen Douglas, senator from Illinois, offered a solution. He wanted the territory to be split into the Kansas Territory and the Nebraska Territory and have the slave question answered by popular sovereignty, or people having the power. Douglas did not want to take a hard stand on slavery. He eventually wanted to run for president of the United States and didn't want to alienate Northern or Southern prospective voters. So he took the safe route with popular sovereignty. In addition, Douglas was not really an advocate for slavery and felt the South would see the light of the new technological innovations of the time period. In essence, he was a market revolutionary with free soiler tendencies. In the aftermath, Douglas did not foresee the blowback that the Kansas-Nebraska popular sovereignty vote would have. The passion of both the pro- and anti-slavery perspectives came to a head, and the territory became a proxy for the two. Bleeding Kansas, as it was called, lasted for years, and hundreds, if not thousands, died in acts of violence and horror on both sides. In addition, violence broke out in the Senate with the caning of Massachusetts Senator Sumner Brooks. The act split and diluted the Whig Party, which saw Southern Whigs side with the Democrats, and Northern Whigs would come together with like-minded politicians and form the new Republican Party. In 1858, the debate over the expansion of slavery took center stage in the Illinois Senate race. The Douglas-Lincoln debate, as it was called due to the fact that Stephen Douglas was the incumbent, saw a series of 7 debates between Republican candidate Abraham Lincoln and Democratic incumbent Stephen Douglas. The local debate became nationalized as the subject revolved around the expansion of slavery into the West. This debate would have attendees of 10 to 15,000 people, and it became a microcosm of how the question of slavery's expansion was the center of attention for all levels of government. Although Lincoln would lose the Senate election, he did, however, gain popularity and respect throughout the North. Furthermore, he was invited to campaign for the Republican Party, and by 1860, he would be the Republican candidate for the presidential election. The debate over slavery would finally make its way to the Supreme Court. The Dred Scott case, also known as Dred Scott v. Sanford, was a decade-long fight for freedom by a black enslaved man named Dred Scott. The case persisted through several courts and ultimately reached the U.S. Supreme Court, whose decision incensed abolitionists, gave momentum to the anti-slavery movement, and served as a stepping stone to the Civil War. Dred Scott sued for his freedom under the premise that he lived, at a time in free territories, Wisconsin and Illinois. Justice Taney became best known for writing the final majority opinion in Dred Scott v. Sanford, which said that all people of African descent, free or enslaved, were not United States citizens and therefore had no right to sue in federal court. In addition, he wrote that the Fifth Amendment protected slave owner rights because enslaved workers were their legal property. The decision also argued that the Missouri Compromise legislation, passed to balance the power between slave and non-slave states, was unconstitutional. In effect, this meant that Congress had no power to prevent the spread of slavery. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. John Brown, 1859.
John Brown, very important person in history. Important for only one episode. Failure in everything in life, except he becomes the single most important factor, in my opinion, in bringing on the war. The militia system in the South, which had been a joke before then, becomes a viable instrument as the Southern militias begin to take a true form, and the South begins to worry about Northerners agitating the blacks to murder them in the bed.
John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory.
With sectional tensions at an all-time high, as a result of the court ruling of Dred Scott, the election of 1860 would be the straw that broke the Union's back. The 1860 presidential election turned on a number of issues, including secession, the relationship between the federal government, states, and territories, and slavery and abolition. Candidates had to consider how to hold the nation together when its states were divided about slavery and states' rights, how to resolve questions about federal versus state power, how to govern the Western territories. In addition, they also had to respond to radical abolitionists like John Brown. Lincoln's careful stance on a variety of issues guided him to a meager victory in a year when the country and its political parties were ravaged by a maelstrom of complicated and volatile issues. Two opponents of slavery, Abraham Lincoln and William Seward, fought for the Republican nomination in 1860. Lincoln advocated a more moderate party plank designed to preserve the Union. Though we remember Lincoln as the president who ended slavery, at the time of his campaign, he vowed not to restrict slavery in states where it was already present, but promised to prohibit expansion in the Western territories. Lincoln also disavowed John Brown. This more moderate position earned Lincoln the Republican nomination. Lou Major of Rutgers University describes Lincoln's moderate views on slavery and race as follows. Lincoln embraced gradual, deliberate change and exemplified that approach. He too believed in white superiority. Lincoln would say, "I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races." There is a physical difference between the white and black races which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together. Lincoln supported colonization, though he realized it was not possible on a large scale. He always hated slavery, but as president refused at first to act against the institution or make provisions for whites and blacks to live peacefully in freedom. Like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party also cracked beneath the weight of the issue at hand. States that favored slavery in the territories walked out of the Democratic Convention Charleston, preventing nominee Stephen Douglas from winning the party endorsement. A reconvened convention eventually nominated Douglas, but kept territory slavery out of the platform altogether. As a result of disagreements over the issues of slavery, splinter parties formed. The Southern Democratic Party spun off from traditional Democrats to nominate John Breckinridge, an advocate of slavery in the West. Republican breakaways formed the Constitutional Union Party. They nominated John Bell, who would not address the issue of slavery at all, but rather spoke of upholding the Constitution. With 4 candidates in the race, Lincoln won the 1860 election, without being on the ballot in 10 Southern states. On December 20th, 1860, the first state, South Carolina, fell to secessionitis. Soon other states would follow and form the Confederate States of America. So why did the election put the South over the edge? It was not Lincoln per se, although they did feel he had abolitionist tendencies. The real issue was the fact that Lincoln won without being on the ballots in southern states, due to the overwhelming population in the North. The South felt that they needed to, quote, get out now, otherwise, who knows who the North could push into office? Someone more radical? Could it be a William Lloyd Garrison? Or what about a Frederick Douglass even? With the Union fractured, it will see the first shots fired of Civil War on April of 1861 at Fort Sumter, South Carolina.